All right, so groundwater-dependent ecosystems and the mighty Tuscan Aquifer are the topic of our program tonight. And so joining us is Taylor Broadhead, a senior manager of water policy at Audubon, California. She made a journey all the way from the Bay Area to be with us, so thank you, Taylor. And as well, we'll also have Jim Brobeck, who has served on the Butte County Water Advisory Committee and has also served as the environmental representative for the community for the VINA Groundwater Sustainability Agency Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So we have a lot of knowledge here with our speakers and other talents too. Perfect. Well, Jim, come on up and share some musical wisdom.
Play a genre of music that I like to call eco-gospel music. And I've got a song that's primarily about valley oaks and groundwater, but this also pertains to blue oaks. Blue oaks are also a groundwater dependent species. So groundwater dependence goes all the way up into the foothills. And valley oaks in particular are an indicator species for a healthy aquifer. In the San Joaquin Valley, the aquifer has been so dewatered that it has extirpated the valley oaks of the San Joaquin Valley. They don't survive unless you irrigate them. In the Sacramento Valley, we still have something that's absolutely worthy of preservation, our valley oak woodlands. I also like to think that the Chico urban forest is similarly dependent on groundwater. And the Chico urban forester has confirmed this with me, that the mature trees in Chico are not irrigated. And yet most of the species can endure the hot summers of the northern Sacramento Valley. So here's a song about valley oaks. Behold the valley oak tree standing in the summer sun. Behold the valley oak tree standing in the summer sun. Behold the valley oak tree standing in the summer sun, 'cause its root reach deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep now, deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep into wet earth. Green leaves cast shadows on those hot summer days. Green leaves cast shadows on those hot summer days. Green leaves cast cool shadows on those hot summer days, 'cause its root reach deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep now, deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep into wet earth. Oak root reach deep into wet earth. Well, the buds make acorns, so all the people eat. Little bitty buds make fat acorns, so all the people eat. Well, the buds make acorns, so all the people eat, 'cause its root reach deep into wet earth. Behold the valley oak tree standing in the wind and rain. Behold the valley oak tree standing in the wind and rain. Behold the valley oak tree standing in the wind and rain, 'cause its root reach deep into the earth.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you.
We'll walk around. No tripping tonight. Wow, so amazing. I've heard these songs on the radios for years. My good friend Guillermo Mash used to do recording for KZFR and interviewed Jim a whole lot of times and recorded a lot of his music about water and our local ecosystems. So thanks for sharing that, Jim. Now we're going to have Taylor Broadhead come up from California Audubon to talk about groundwater-dependent ecosystems, as well as her work relating to these ecosystems and their protections in groundwater sustainability plans. So yeah, I'll give this mic to Taylor.
Thanks. Well, I'm nervous because there's a lot of other water experts tonight. So if I get any tough questions, I might call upon you guys. Okay. Yeah, well, thank you. So I'm Taylor Broadhead. I'm from Audubon, California. Starting to partner with the Cal Audubon. So thank you, Jared, for inviting me up. I'm a senior manager of water policy. So we'll talk a little bit again, or a lot of it, about groundwater dependent ecosystems, but also just generally touching upon what Audubon California has been up to for our water work recently. We kind of put it into four big buckets. The first one being that our water priorities are protecting critical habitat. That's very vague, but I broke it up into sustaining and kind of like maintaining what we have and protecting what we have, and then finding new partnerships and creating new habitat opportunities because, again, we're kind of losing things really quickly. So the second point being advocate for ecosystems and California water policy. So that might look like advocating for groundwater dependent ecosystems within our groundwater policy, or also supporting bills as they make their way through the legislative process. And kind of what that looks like now is, I'm sure a lot of people can imagine, is we're seeing federal protections of lands being stripped away. And so a lot of the bills going through the legislature right now for water policy are kind of like state proofing protections that are kind of being taken away. So how can we put up state backstops to what might be stripped away federally? And the third is supporting local efforts to protect ecosystems. So making sure that we're providing local environmental stakeholders technical assistance and tools so that they can do what they do best, but also help us help you guys, and just providing extra capacity and whatever that looks like and understanding what the local needs are. And then the fourth is strategic land repurposing. I think a lot of people know that we're running out of groundwater. We can't irrigate agriculture like we used to. I put this here because it is a big priority. I won't touch on it too much. I'll kind of focus on the first three, but I do have a slide on it, so we will get there. So yeah, so a big focal area for us right now is working on wetland issues. Wetlands are globally important. They provide areas to help reduce risk from flooding, providing habitat for wildlife and birds, sequestering carbon, and also helping to improve water quality. The wetlands in California, they actually provide habitat to half of all of the animals and then a third of all of the plants on California's endangered species list. And they support 60% of the Pacific flyway waterbirds, which is really impressive given how much of them we've already lost. So since the 1850s, we'll see this like map here in the middle, pre-1900s, and just kind of focusing on the areas in red, these are the wetlands that we used to have. And so they're kind of these big swaths that were really connected, versus now we've lost about 90 to 95% of them. So not only are they smaller now, but they're also highly fragmented. So this might not be such a problem for birds because they fly, but it's a big problem for all the little critters that need more habitat connectivity. And so despite the fact that we only have about 5 to 10% left, they still have to support 60% of the birds on the Pacific Flyway, but then also 20% of all of North America's waterfowl. And so this is a big problem when you have these big populations gathering into these tiny areas. Disease spreads really fast and they get food shortages, so they're even more vulnerable to disease. Yeah, so I mentioned creating habitat to protect wetlands. This is one example. So I don't work closely on this program, so I may not be able to answer every question about it, but just a quick plug. So Audubon California has a project with the Nature Conservancy in Point Blue, where they're essentially working with landowners to use working lands as surrogate habitat for birds. So we're kind of thinking of it like ideally, you would have permanent lands that are providing habitat every year. But since we don't necessarily have that, we need to think of investing in a population as a whole. So you're not necessarily just investing in the land itself, but keeping the population healthy today, regardless of what's going to be there the next year. So we're kind of trying to address like different sides of the issue with this. And then the second one is multi-benefit land repurposing program. Can I get a show of hands? Has anybody heard of this program? Oh, interesting. Okay, good. So this is more of a popular program, and it's currently happening further in the San Joaquin Valley. So this program came about because in the photo that you see here, this is fallowed land. So when there's not enough water to grow crops, farmers will often fallow the land either seasonally or permanently, depending on what their water situation is. And when they do that, it leaves this kind of like blanket of just bare land. And so if there's nothing growing on top of it, it creates all these dust issues, you lose soil nutrients. And so this program was started. And I guess to back up again, another point is that the landowner is going to lose a lot of money. And that's really sad for a lot of people, especially where land has been in their family for generations. And so what we want to do is help kind of provide like economic padding for the land that's going out of production, but at the same time learning from people locally what they need. So talking to communities and realizing people don't even have a place to sit outside because they're just completely surrounded by almonds. And so can we turn this into a nature park with habitat and things like that? So it's kind of putting funding toward there. It's not funding that matches the magnitude of the issue that we're going to have, but think of it more like we're kind of piloting what some of these strategic land fallowing could be. And then in the future, finding other funding sources that can help come together and make this a bigger impact. So kind of getting back more to talking about maintaining what we have, you kind of got to get to the root of the question of why did our wetlands shrink so much in the first place? This is sort of a complicated issue, and I'll walk through it piece by piece, but the number one culprit is land use conversion. Because wetlands are areas that are really rich in nutrients, these were hotspots to be converted into irrigated agriculture. And then when that becomes more ubiquitous across the landscape, can you guys see my mouse? You can't. Okay, that's okay. You can keep your eyes on like the surface here. And so when you have more irrigated agriculture, what surface water is available, and again, this is kind of a huge issue further south because there's not much surface water available. More straws that go in the surface water, the less there is downstream for wetland habitat. And so I'm trying to rip over this real quick. But this little stream right here that's coming off of this channel, you can imagine if this flow gets so degraded over time, this channel can become extremely disconnected and over time just completely non-existent. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of our wetlands further south. And then once that happens, we couldn't get surface water there even if we wanted to, because now it becomes a $30 million pipeline that needs to be built instead of relying on old natural conveyance. And then the solution there is relying on groundwater to keep these areas alive. As you can see through this image, though, how many straws are in the ground, the more you put and the bigger the straws. So there might be a small farm and, the straw is this big, or there could be a giant insurance corporation that owns like so many thousands of acres to where it's a huge straw. And so that really affects the groundwater levels that are under these wetlands. And the more that this level drops, if their well is only so deep and it drops below, then you start having trouble getting groundwater to the wetland. So then the issue that we're starting to work on more and more is with so many straws in the ground, how do we start managing our groundwater responsibly? And this is kind of just to show further in the South San Joaquin, kind of what I'm talking about. This also extends north. So these areas in red are critically overdrafted groundwater basins. So that just means that the straws are taking so much groundwater and it's happening faster than it can naturally be replenished by streams and rain. So we're getting extremely low groundwater levels to the point, like Jim mentioned, things are just becoming so intensely disconnected that people have to take out like second mortgages on their homes because their groundwater levels are dropping below their domestic well. They have to irrigate their trees. And that's kind of what this image on the right is showing, or plants, and like the red line might be groundwater level. And you can imagine if it drops below a certain threshold, it becomes completely disconnected. And the plants that used to access groundwater can no longer do that. So groundwater dependent ecosystem tends to be kind of a very specific term. When you hear groundwater dependent ecosystem, you might think that first example of what I was talking about, where you're disconnected from surface water and now your ecosystem has to be watered by groundwater. That's true. That is technically groundwater dependent, but the term GDE is really referring to, especially in like the plant context, these plants that are reaching their roots actually down into the earth and accessing the groundwater. Those plants can be fully groundwater dependent, depending on the surface water access, or they can be partially groundwater dependent. So sometimes, and those are called facultative GDEs for the people who like terms. Yeah, so they're partially groundwater dependent. And that has a lot of challenges with managing and protecting them under policy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Another example of partially dependent groundwater ecosystems or salmon. So this is kind of like showing you a riparian area. Like Jim mentioned, groundwater dependent plants aren't necessarily always riparian. They can be out far away from streams and still be connected to the groundwater. And in those cases, they might really be important to protect because they don't have temporary access or seasonal access to surface water. But in this case, in this riparian area, we have salmon. And so part of salmon life, they're out at the ocean. That's not groundwater dependent. But then during a certain stage of their life, they migrate upstream, and the stream flow that they need a certain temperature. So the water has to be cold. And the groundwater in a lot of places is actually connected to the surface. And so the groundwater is kind of coming up, providing this cold water that's in the ground and bringing the temperature of the stream down so that the salmon can thrive. And it also, like when the streams are dry during like summer months or other dry months, then it can actually provide more flow to the stream. So you would say part of the salmon's life is actually groundwater dependent. So that's kind of like a more complicated example, but just to show the range of different species and wildlife that are dependent on it. So again, like the question is, what systems can we put in place to protect this like very specific type of ecosystem? By a show of hands, how many people know about SGMA, or Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? Wow, okay, a good number of people. Um, let's see. Okay, I will give a little bit of a primer to it so everyone's on the same page, but know that we could talk about this all day, every day for a week and still not scratch the surface. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, it was signed into law in 2014. And something interesting, actually, it kind of came and was inspired by a groundwater policy that was happening in Arizona. I think their governor or previous governor actually helped draft this. So an example of kind of learning from other water policy in other states. But the goal is to manage our groundwater without causing harmful impacts. And under SGMA, they're defined as 6 of them. The first one is lowering of groundwater levels. That's what we'll talk about mostly. And so that's kind of like that groundwater overdraft. You draw down the levels enough that you're starting to, cut off different users. Reduction of groundwater storage, you actually pump so much out of the aquifer, it starts to compact. So you don't have as much storage in the ground as you used to have. Seawater intrusion, I won't talk about that too much. That's very much a coastal issue. Water quality degradation, the more you pump it out, the more concentrated some of the constituents become. And then the water that's getting put back in, it goes through like the root zone and gets pesticides and nitrates, and suddenly the stuff is really concentrated in drinking water. And people essentially can't drink their drinking water, so they rely on bottled water, much in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Land subsidence, so when you're pumping out the water from the aquifer, the land, again, it starts to compact and it starts to sink. And it's really bad in a lot of places to where it's just crumbling public infrastructure. So that's used to convey water. So then your water conveyance becomes more impacted and you are reducing your ability to deliver as much surface water as you used to be able to. And then that interconnected stream, you don't want to lose that connection. So that was another one. So how much of California does this cover? It's pretty much across the state, but it's really focusing right now in the immediate future on these areas in the Central Valley that are in critical shape. It's about 120 groundwater basins. The governance, so there were local agencies that formed on each of these subbasins, and they're supposed to be the ones who are charged with managing and coming up with plans called Groundwater Sustainability Plans, or GSPs, that outline how exactly they plan on bringing their basin into balance. So years ago, a group of NGOs got together called the Groundwater Leadership Forum, and they actually reviewed every GSP across the state as it was coming out. And they wanted to say, hey, you guys are planning to protect the different users in your basin. Do you actually do that? And they found that no, they don't do a great job at it necessarily. So they looked at if they protect community drinking water wells, if they protect small agricultural wells, and groundwater-dependent ecosystems. And so again, focusing on the ecosystem side of that, they found that 91% of the GDEs in all of these basins are unprotected. And I kind of put this comparison here because on the right, you see all this ugly red, like, oh my gosh, none of them are protected. But on the left, it shows you, well, the Department of Water Resources was actually approving a lot of these plans. So just because a plan was approved does not make it a good plan. And luckily for us, Sigma is supposed to be adaptive, so we do get chances where GSAs are supposed to be updating their plans. And the reason why it was made like that is we're getting new data all the time. A lot of data systems now exist because of this law that didn't exist before, because this is the amount of coordination that all of this has taken across the state, the amount of science that's had to be done is really remarkable, and it's not done yet. So they have this update process. But I put this here because the findings from that study were published in this paper on the left. And then on the right, something that was super interesting that came of it was the same study found that essentially if a groundwater sustainability agency was better at engaging stakeholders, they found that there was a correlation between how well that stakeholder group was protected in the plan. So it really goes to show the importance of people being able and being supported and engaging in the process. I also put this here because this is actually a really cool website, sigmareview.org, and you can actually go in and click around in the maps and zoom in and see your area and see how much of your GDEs and the area that you care about are actually protected. So I just kind of put that there because it's a cool tool. I also think it's easier to lay it out in like a timeline. So 2020 is about the time that these basins started pulling the plans together and submitting them. And that's when this review happened. And so what comes from this review? Like we found the plans aren't doing great. So now what? Well, DWR essentially said, hey, to select groups of this NGO collaborative, if you don't approve of these plans and they're not actually adequate at protecting your stakeholder groups, here's some funding. Go pilot this in a couple basins and show us what a better analysis would look like. Tell us what the locals actually need so that way DWR can learn from this and then roll it out across the state. So essentially, they're relying on this group of NGOs to be sort of their hands locally that informs how they do everything globally. Yeah, and that's where we're at now. So this program, the DWR Technical Assistance Program, it's kind of an umbrella. So there's three groups. There's the community drinking water folks, there's small farmers, and then there's us on the ecological side. So Audubon is partnering with the Nature Conservancy, Melissa Rohde, who's a groundwater-dependent ecosystem scientist. A lot of this work is based off of the preliminary research that she has done. And then Ag Innovations. So they're a consultant who helps with public engagement. And what we're doing under this program is partnering with two different GSAs. So we're partnering with the Yolo subbasin and also the Vina subbasin, which includes Chico. And then TNC and Melissa are working on kind of a technical side. So they're kind of digging into the data and actually saying, here's what you have, here's how it could be better. And then on the stakeholder outreach and integration side, Audubon California is working with Butte Environmental Council and Vina, AltaCal Audubon, Aqualliance, so many others I'm going to forget off the top of my head. But we've pretty much been engaging these groups and trying to say, hey, what are the GDEs that you guys care about on the ground? And how can we actually connect the analysis to what you guys are seeing on the ground? And then also learning from your guys' experiences and working with a GSA. Pretty much what I've learned from talking to people at a high level is you might be able to have all the technical information you have and you can bring it somewhere and it doesn't necessarily mean it will go anywhere. And these aren't necessarily problems we can solve overnight. Like this is just going to take a lot of time and relationship building, but it also helps DWR kind of figure out, okay, where is stakeholder engagement going wrong and where can they start kind of putting pressure and helping other GSAs and setting kind of like, I don't want to say rules because they're not rules, but setting kind of like goalposts or milestones that people should be reaching in public engagement. So when we say GDEs are protected or not, I kind of want to like talk through a little bit what that is at the broad level. So how would you say a GDE is protected? Well, you would really need to monitor the groundwater level, right? And say like, this is what their rooting depth is. This is where the groundwater level's at. Are these two things coming together or not? And to be able to do that, we really need monitoring wells that kind of like dig deep and tell you what the groundwater level is. But we don't have those everywhere. So we kind of have to pick representative ones and then piece together a bigger puzzle. And so this is what we're saying. Like if you look at this image, the monitoring wells only cover a certain amount of area, and then everything else isn't covered. And then when we talk about it actually being protected, we're talking about having GSAs establishing goals for the water levels that actually make sense given the plants that are there and how deep their roots go. And so that's what we mean when we say it's protected. They set an appropriate goal for their water to be at to where the plants can actually live. And if it's not appropriate, it's not protected, and therefore the GDE could be at risk. But there are some technical challenges with this, right? Like you look at a plant and you could say, how do we actually know this is a GDE? Especially if it's in a riparian area and it's getting surface water. You could say, well, it's getting surface water, therefore it's not a groundwater dependent ecosystem. The only way to truly tell that is if you did like a radioisotope and you kind of like characterize the water in the source versus what's in the plant. That is so expensive and you can't do that everywhere. And so what we end up relying on is satellite imagery. But satellite imagery, even then, it's not perfect. So it can only tell us where we think GDEs might be, but then we rely on local knowledge to ground truth it, or we just kind of have to start making assumptions to some point because we need, like the scale of the problem again is just so big. We need to start making assumptions and be more edge on the side of being more protective than not. So those are some of the data gaps that we're struggling with. And then again, resources are really limited. So even, knowing what we know with management actions, we really have to prioritize. We have to prioritize management and prioritize monitoring to places where there's local knowledge that these are really important ecosystems. And we know that they're important to the people who live there, and we know that they're important to the wildlife. So on the engagement side, the first goal there is to really understand from people. And I talk to folks in the Vina subbasin, in the Butte subbasin, across California to figure out kind of what went right and what went wrong, and figuring out like what were the barriers to engagement. Was it that you were armed with all the information and it went nowhere? That's often the case. And then some other cases, it's people just didn't have the base level understanding of Sigma and groundwater, even though they would care about this issue to show up and be an advocate for it. So we kind of have to figure out like what is the problem and where those opportunities are at. And then again, that kind of gets into this providing technical assistance piece. And the way that we did that was to interview stakeholders and start engaging them early in the process. And part of this was figuring out who is where and who wants to engage and who has been engaging, and kind of building our knowledge there and then interviewing them. And then based on those interviews, kind of trying to figure out like where we need to close the gaps. And so what we realized from the interviews was we still have a long way to go in just general Sigma and groundwater education. So we hosted a webinar in December, and maybe I can work with Jared to send out that link because we have a recording of it. So if you're interested, that goes a little bit more into the background science. It gives a little bit more of a primer on the groundwater law that you guys might find interesting. And then another thing, and another kind of plug I'll put in here, is that I think here is probably gonna be mid to late May. We don't have a date set yet, but we're gonna have an in-person workshop with the GSA. So the GSA is gonna explain what is in their GSP, how they did it. We're gonna explain how it's actually being improved, what we can and what we can't do with it, and then trying to pair it with a field visit. So we're going to pick a field site, maybe where we can go out and see some groundwater dependent ecosystems that may or may not be doing well, depending, because if it's wet outside, they might be blooming. But yeah, and then kind of seeing how we can connect the data to what is actually going on the ground, and hearing from people in the community who actually really care to see these places protected. And again, it's kind of about establishing relationships between different entities and figuring out what can we work collaboratively on together moving forward. And then at the end of all of this, we're going to be reporting to DWR and saying, hey, this is what worked, this is what didn't, here's where DWR really needs to fill in the gaps, and here's where they can help support people locally. So again, timeline form, the interviews and finding people who are interested, I put that as like last year, even though it's really ongoing. So if anyone's interested in this work, please let me know and I'll loop you into our kind of group chat that we have going. And then this spring, we're going to be doing that workshop, probably end of May. And then at the end of 2025, we're going to be handing in our final report to DWR. So I'm not really sure when that report will be made public, but once it is, I'll be sure to keep people updated. And that's it. So thank you guys for listening to my TED Talk.
All right, any questions for Taylor from California Audubon? Ken?
Yes.
But does that get ecosystem also when they do something like that?
Maybe that's kind of the hardest part, is we have to do this kind of like cost benefit analysis. So is it going to do more harm than good? If it's going to happen anyway, how can we kind of make the best out of a situation that's happening, like despite our advocacy and what is kind of out of our control? I think the risks with it are when you raise up a dam, you're kind of flooding an area out. And there's another reservoir actually that they are raising up even higher. And so this really affects tribes in a lot of ways too, because they might have Native American burial sites that would get flooded out when you start flooding new areas. So that could be an issue. With sites, so if there's more water storage, and the point of that really is, keeping flows to send further south. Yeah, it's good for the farmers, if this all gets down into like the partnership. So if you have partnerships with landowners or these like water managers, they might have water that they can send to like habitat projects. But that's hard because if we don't have any regulations or anything that kind of holds them to do some kind of mitigation, if it's a voluntary agreement, I think environmental folks have been raising the alarm about that for a long time. Because if you leave it up to the goodness of somebody's heart and it costs money, they're going to tend to not do those actions. So I guess it depends. Yeah, it depends on all the actors involved with it. So it could also harm water supply for refuges up here.
You talking about sites reservoir?
Mhm. Yeah, Jim, if you know, please chime in.
Princeton Sites Reservoir. There's talking to the public that sites reservoirs are here. Ever since the 70s, millions of dollars of taxpayer money has been invested into the planning for Sites Reservoir. Even though Sites Reservoir is a private project, it's not a public project. It would be operated by for instance, the Glen Groundwater Association. There's a man who lives here in town who was the chief of water quality for the Northern District of Department of Water Resources. And when he analyzed the water flows during flood events that come off the Coast Range, he found that there were alarmingly elevated levels of heavy metals. The Coast Range is notorious for containing chrome, arsenic, mercury, and a variety of other heavy metals. And he said the source water that comes out of Cottonwood Creek is particularly alarming. And then the actual footprint of Sites Reservoir has an area called Salt Lake. So there are salt springs over there. There's a town that used to be over there called Chrome because there's chrome in the ground. The ground over there is relatively stable, but if you inundate that and sacrifice all that land, well, you've seen what happens when you drain Oroville Reservoir. You have naked banks. And when you get precipitation on that, you get huge levels of sedimentation. So that's another issue. Water quality in Sites Reservoir is an extreme concern for environmentalists. This gentleman who used to be the water quality said that the water that comes out of it will probably be so tainted with heavy metals that the state water board will not allow them to put it back in the Sacramento River because it will have impacts on the river. And that means that that water will have to be used here to irrigate rice. And rice can take up arsenic and other heavy metals. So I'm very skeptical. And one other thing, there's 2 input pumps, one up in Red Bluff and one in Hamilton City. They say, oh, we're just going to take the flood flows. Where the flood flows go up and down, the amount of water that they can pump out of those 2 pumps, if they pumped it 24 hours a day, 365 days, and put all that water into Sites Reservoir, it still would not fill Sites Reservoir. That's if you didn't use any of that water in the irrigation canals. So I just have a feeling that Sites is diverting attention away from the real issue. And the real issue is that the irrigation districts are developing groundwater infrastructure to endure dry periods when they get their surface water allocation eliminated. In fact, the Sacramento Valley settlement contractors have just issued their final environmental impact report for their drought resiliency plan, in which they would be cut several 100,000 acre feet of surface water, and they would replace that with groundwater. They have plans to pump about 170,000 acre feet out of the aquifer, out of our shared aquifer. They're on the other side of the river, but this basin comes all the way over to here, and it may take a while for the impacts to occur in the Vinus subbasin, but make no mistake, it will impact us over here when they get the dry period, and we will have more dry years, and they develop their groundwater infrastructure and pump directly out of the aquifer into the canals. 8 or 9 times the amount of water that the city of Chico uses. And they'll pump that during the irrigation season, every dry period. The city of Chico, when asked to conserve water, cut their cow water impacts from 31,000 acre feet. We've done a great job. We're down to 19 or 20,000 acre feet, mostly because we've replaced some of our in-house water utilities, like our shower heads, our toilets. But most of that has to do with conversion of our landscape into drought resilient landscape. You see a lot of lawns have been pulled out, and we have much more efficient landscaping happening. So the city of Chico, even though the population has grown significantly since the fires, we use 33% less water than we did 10 years ago.
Wow.
I see a question.
So we know about subsidence. Is there any evidence that potential for rebound to happen?
And subsidence?
Yeah, the inverse of subsidence.
No, subsidence is permanent, and subsidence is happening on the other side of the valley. There's wide areas that have subsided a small amount, but there's a narrow band from Arbuckle up to Orland that has dropped feet already. It's dropping approximately a half a foot a year over there. I talked to Dr. Green, who is the head of the earth sciences at Chico State University. And I said, well, does the Vinus subbasin, does this side have the underground geology that makes us susceptible to it? He said, absolutely. We have clay layers. When you dewater clay layers, they compact. And once they compact, that's it. They will never puff up again. And so subsidence can be a big problem for infrastructure, to be sure.
I'll add on to that real quick. There is a big infrastructure, canal infrastructure for the south of San Joaquin Valley called the Frank Kern Canal, if you ever heard of that. So they did a huge project to replace that because it sunk so bad. So the new Frank Kern Canal that delivers water to how many people think it's huge. It's new. It's only like a few years in operation or something now. It's already lost 60% of its operating capacity because of subsidence. And something about subsidence that's interesting is that even if you stop pumping today, the land will keep compacting because it's a future projecting issue. And so we could stop everything we're doing today and still see subsidence.
Thanks for the talk. I had a question about the SEMA review model. What's everything on there?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to succinctly repeat the question. So the first part being is like kind of what to do about the fact that all these plans like aren't sufficient, yet they're still passed anyway. And then the second part being who is learning from who, kind of like in water management, I guess. And are people learning from California? Are we learning from other people? For the first part, what to do about that? I mean, it's sort of just like the fact of a matter that people have raised. And the hope is that once, all this stuff is coming to light, DWR has to review and approve the plans again once they go up for like the 5-year update. And the hope is that knowing everything we know now, DWR can kind of tighten up their review of these plans for the future. So I think in the first place, there were some big general boxes to check because everyone was so new to it. And so, yeah, we're seeing like the details that everybody gets into are not being appropriately accounted for. They kind of checked big giant boxes. And so it was kind of saying like the plans that are really, really bad are going to go into probation. And that's what we're seeing right now. Further in the South San Joaquin Valley, there are these basins that are kind of going up for hearings from the state water board. And the state water board is saying you're in probation or you're not. And they get, other chances, or the state pretty much steps in and manages the groundwater for you. And we haven't seen that happen yet. Maybe, yeah, we're close. And then there's interesting things where like the groundwater sustainability agencies are fragmenting, and then what do you do? And So there's so many issues that come from it, but I guess the short answer to that question is we don't know yet, and it just depends on who what?
Who's running the Delaware?
I believe it's TNC. Yeah, I think it's
It's not part of the groups that are actually creating the law or so it's external.
yeah, so this is like a nonprofit that works on that website and hosts that information and the data. Yeah, TNC. But yeah, separate from DWR. And then the second part of the question is this informing other states? Yeah, we're trying to. We're trying to communicate lessons learned. I don't think that, to my knowledge, and if anybody knows differently, please tell me. I don't think that's like a government to government kind of thing. I think it's more like NGOs that might be kind of like national NGOs like Audubon. Like we have a Western water team of people who work on water policy across all the Western states, and it's kind of up to us of like sharing lessons learned. We can run bills ourselves and try to change things. I think something that they're starting to learn from California, at least in Arizona, is the concept of management areas, um, to manage groundwater in specific places. They do something though that we didn't do. So they always kind of had this buffer zone approach. California is starting this to where, and further in the southern San Joaquin Valley again, you'll have like irrigated agriculture that was developed around these communities and drawing their water wells down. But in Arizona, they kind of like saw that that would be an issue and kind of patted up against it by saying no expansion of irrigated agriculture anywhere near a vicinity of a community area. And so we're adopting it late, they adopted it early, and then we have other pieces of Sigma, like, but theirs isn't anywhere near kind of on the level that California's is in terms of like statewide coordination and all the data, resources, and everything that's coming from that.
Well, thanks so much, Taylor. But I think we'll hold the question until the end because Jim does have some more things to share.
Yes,
In the
please.
interest of time. We'll hand it over to Jim. So save those questions. If you're listening online on Zoom, type your questions into the chat and we'll address them. Thanks so much, Taylor.
Let's talk about the Tuscan Aquifer. Who's been on the North Rim Trail? Excellent. Who's driven up Highway, is it Highway 99 and, going past the dump, going past Neil Road? You know the angle of the hill that goes down on the North Rim Trail, the angle of the hill that you see as you drive up 99, that is the angle of the Tuscan Aquifer. It dives under the ground. Now, the Tuscan Aquifer is recharged, not in the valley floor, but it's recharged in the mountains and the foothills. It goes underneath these confining layers, the lava cap, the mud flows. And so the Cal water pumps that are located by the fire station up by Upper Park, those wells are about 500 feet deep. On the other side of Chico, the wells are 700 feet deep. The wells that the Glen Cluse Irrigation District have installed in Hamilton City are 1,100 feet deep. This is all tapping the same confined aquifer. The Sigma likes to call it, they simplify it, much like a lot of these images here, look like it's just a pool of water. It is not a pool of water. It is a confined aquifer that's pressurized because it goes up into the foothills. And just like if you take a hose and go like this, there'll be pressure at the bottom end of the hose. This aquifer leaks upward through complex old stream beds, and it holds up the water table. Back before the wells were drilled into the deep aquifer, there were numerous artesian springs throughout the Northern Valley. When they first put holes in the ground, the water would come out free because of the pressure. Well, that has declined now. There are thousands of wells that are punctured into the deep aquifer. And it's declined, but it's still worthy of managing. It's still high enough that it is preventing, in a lot of cases, the water table from slipping down. Now, unfortunately, we see our creeks slipping into the ground in a way they didn't used to. When I first came to Chico in the early 70s, Big Chico Creek did not go dry during the summer. Now Big Chico Creek has stretches that go through the university that go dry. It's leaking into the aquifer, because the pressurized aquifer is losing its foundational prowess to hold things up. Similarly with Pine Creek, with Rock Creek, with Mud Creek, these used to be perennial streams. Now they are seasonal streams. Milo, will you help me and hold this up? Mr. Ortiz from the Union of Concerned Scientists, I saw his name mentioned. He's part of this team.
Which one first?
Let's just go with this second one here. He said that even though Sigma has employed some novel stakeholder strategies, for the most part, the plans ended up being dominated by those with the most power and the most money. That is absolutely my experience working in the VINA plan. I went to every single stakeholder advisory meeting. I had consultations with hydrologists, with the university, with the domestic well owners who were also had a seat. There was great opposition to the final product. This graph here shows, these blue lines show the historic level of water. It goes down during the summer and up during the winter, up and down, up and down, up and down. When I first got involved with groundwater, Butte County had the basin management objectives, and it was controlled by citizens. We decided that if it ever hit the historic low, that should raise alarms, that should be a big problem. We don't want to hit lows. We want to keep it up here so that we keep our stream flow, so we keep our valley oaks, so we keep our urban forest. The final product of the VINA plan designates the management objective at approximately the historic low of aquifer levels. And the operating range goes down in this particular well to 116 feet below the surface of the ground. Valley oaks, the most they can go is 80 feet down. The most blue oaks can go is 80 feet down. If you take it down below that, you're going to lose your trees. Certainly, when you hit it down here, you start losing stream flow. But they designate this line here, which is the minimum threshold, as the point at which you begin to see undesirable results. It makes no sense. What makes sense is this is a water banking description. And the projects that Butte County and the GSAs up here are putting forth are recharge projects. Recharge projects require diverting surface water. The only people that have surface water have senior water rights. If they divert water and attempt to recharge the aquifer, then they own the water in storage. That water is surface water in storage. It's no longer legally groundwater. It's surface water in storage. In Southern California and the San Fernando Valley, they allowed the water to be put down in there and to recharge the aquifer. After a few years, the water diverters owned all the water in storage, and the people that had wells down there had to put meters on their wells. They had to shut their wells off, or they had to pay for the water. This is not where we want to operate. We've got something up here that is so worthy of protection. It's a complex living system. When I look at the Tuscan Aquifer, I see something akin to our own circulatory system, with the pressure down below, like our major blood vessels. And then it goes into smaller and smaller capillaries, which leak upward and give our tissues the sustenance it needs. And our aquifer system is so similar to that. It's this living system. I mean, I think a lot of the people in this room have a feeling that the earth is an entity, a living entity. I call it my spiritual belief. The Mother Earth is my God. And these water systems are the circulatory system. And I'm doing everything I can to defend it. The state is moving rapidly ahead with their drought resiliency plans that are relying on Sigma. They say Sigma will protect us. We can grow, we can pull the water down, and then we can fill it back up during wet years. And they're saying Sigma is there to protect it as long as we operate within these operating range. And I made a good faith effort to engage. I went to every meeting for years to bring up these issues of groundwater dependent ecosystems. And the only groundwater dependent ecosystems that they wanted to identify were wetlands, were areas that were directly riparian. They refused to include the city of Chico as a groundwater dependent entity. Oh, it's not an ecosystem. Well, are there birds in our trees in Chico? Yeah. I'm sorry. This urban forest is an ecosystem. What we have left of our valley oak groves are definitely ecosystems. These mother trees that pull the water up from deep and then spread it, distribute it through the other plants that can't get down that deep through the mycelial mat. They're the keystone species for the other animals and plants that live within the valley oak groves, and they're an indicator species, as are the blue oaks for are we managing the groundwater correctly. If we start seeing our valley oak trees dying off, if we start seeing our blue oak trees dying off, we don't need to have 1,000 monitoring wells to recognize this. We need some, but Butte County already has a pretty good network of monitoring wells. Some of them are dedicated monitoring wells that measure the shallow, the intermediate, and then the deep aquifer. And those provide very good data for what's happening. Another aspect of Sigma is interbasin coordination. What happens on the other side of the valley on a shared aquifer isn't going to affect us the first year, but it affects us down the line. David's Engineering, who is a water engineering firm located up here in Northern California, has said that the further away you are from the water pump, the longer it takes for the impact to occur, but the longer it persists. But certainly what's happening on the other side of the valley is going to impact us. We're in the upgradient portion of this aquifer, for God's sake. And my concern is that eventually it's going to slip away as the water purveyors continue to ship water south to the moneyed interests. So we need to get educated on how the aquifer system works. We need to understand that water banking and recharge projects, even though recharge sounds like the best thing, recharge has these huge legal consequences having to do with who owns the water and how do we operate the water bank. It's not a water bank, it's a living system. We need to keep it up in here. We can't start operating down here, or we're going to be like Fresno. In Fresno, if you want to have a tree, it's going to cost you about $500 a year to keep that tree alive. We don't have to water our trees up here. It's a precious thing we have here. It's worthy of defending. Now, DWR is not very happy with Aqualliance filing lawsuits we're disagreeing with the Groundwater Sustainability Plan for the Vina, the Butte Basin south of here, and the Colusa Basin. Colusa Basin, by the way, was considered incomplete until about a month ago, and they made some minor adjustments, and now DWR said, okay, theirs is complete. So they're moving ahead with their plans to do water banking, with their water resilience plan to shift to taxpayer-funded wells. They want millions of dollars to drill 30 new large diameter wells to be pumping out of the aquifer, to pump into their canals. Rice is a great crop to grow up here. It grows really well, and it's an annual crop. You can fallow it during dry years when there's not enough surface water, unlike orchards. Family orchards are great, but unfortunately, the expansion of orchards has gone too far. And it's continuing to expand on the other side as they rip through their clay layers to put in a more valuable crop of walnuts or almonds, although we'll see what these trade barriers are going to do for the international trade for nuts. That's an opportunity for us to get more conservation. Taylor talked about land repurposing. One of the orchardists who supports Aqualliance's efforts came up with an idea we can delay orchard response. Now, I know Jared would like to see permanent, and there's a place down in the river that he showed me where it's uneconomical to continue to try to grow walnuts right by the river, and they can permanently take that out and turn it into habitat. And that will save a lot of water. That's a great idea, but there's very viable family orchards here that are willing to delay replanting their orchard because they pull the orchards out after I don't know how many decades of producing nuts. And then they like to put them right back in for economic purposes, but they don't need to do that. And they recognize they want to be responsible. So we've got some very responsible orchardists here that are willing to sacrifice a year or two delayed orchard replanting and plant a cover crop in it so it doesn't look like what Taylor showed, which would be a dust bowl, which would cause erosion. So you can instead of putting 5 acre-feet of water on an orchard, you can get by with 1 acre-feet of water on a cover crop. So there are strategies that are viable strategies that Aqualliance supports, and we encourage to be implemented in the plan. But in the meantime, we're going to challenge these plans that are threatening the ecosystems, the groundwater ecosystems of this area that we live. And to do that, we need to protect our pressurized aquifer and to reject these pie in the sky recharge projects that they're getting ready to fund. Any questions? I see you.
Please repeat the question after she's done too, so everyone online.
I'll try.
Wow.
Yeah, talk nice and loud.
Wondering with my new GSP being atrocious with Audubon being that community here, right, of the bird, will they be able to take this to DWR and potentially put that GSP also on probation because of how bad it is?
Yes.
No.
No.
The Department of Water Resource exists to move water. The State Water Board is supposed to be the overseer that protects the viability of water supplies, the water quality, that protects things like this, that protects the delta. For instance,
Question really quick.
Oh, she wants to know if community opposition to a plan would encourage DWR to shift and make it a better plan. I'm very skeptical about that. They were fully aware of the opposition. We had 11 or 12 people in the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, which are the people that came up under the guidance of DWR funded consultants. And five of the 11 had strong feelings against the final plan as it was drafted. Ignored. They totally ignored the input that I put in there as far as we need to protect our valley oaks. We need to protect the stream flow. And they moved ahead as the Union of Concerned Scientists said, and it's the people with the most money and the most political influence that won the day. And so the plan moved forward. And by the way, the head of the Butte County Department of Water Resources, who oversaw these Sigma plans, was as soon as the plan was drafted, as soon as the Butte and the Vina plans were drafted, he abruptly resigned his position here in Butte County and was installed as the deputy director of Sigma in Sacramento. For DWR, right. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a question is especially with the very obvious agenda of our current administration. It feels like a lot of these community efforts were just really small fighters in this huge battle with giants. And so I wonder, what can we do as concerned citizens? How can we support this kind of battle and protection of our water?
Be educated and don't be diverted by by concepts like Los Angeles is our enemy. Our brothers and sisters in Los Angeles need a water supply. They need a reliable water supply. The population in the Metropolitan Water District has doubled since the 1970s, but the amount of water they use has remained flat because they're instigating, just like the city of Chico did. We need to be unified as a people and not degrade our fellow citizens and say, oh, they're the enemy. They're not the enemy. Nobody's the enemy. I mean, I'm sure that the industrial agriculturalists think that their efforts are every bit as honorable as I think mine are. I treat them with respect, but I treat them with skepticism. They've got a lot of money and a lot of power in Sacramento, and they drive these water supply projects that have continued to damage the environment here in California and presented us with unrealistic expectations of an endlessly growing water supply. It's not true. We can have a viable agricultural economy. We can have vibrant urban landscapes, and we can have healthy ecosystems. And I'm convinced of it. And so, what can we do? Well, not hate our adversaries, not hate our fellow citizens. And I'm not a fundraiser, but you might want to support Aqualliance because we're the only people that are putting up a legal challenge to these nefarious plans that are going to cause some problems in our area. This operating range should not look like this. It should look like this.
There's a question on the chat from, it looks like Marcy Ligamari asking, could the law that allows ownership of recharged water be changed? So that the concern about water banking, the person recharging the water, could that law be changed that allows water banking?
The monetization of it is why people with senior water rights would be willing to give up their water. So are they willing to give it to us? I think, but you're from the Yuba Water Agency? North Yuba? I don't think the law can be changed. No, that's pretty established law, but this is long enough. Why don't you ask your question into this?
My question is, how do the groundwater basins, how does Tuscan Water District think about buying water, and what is that good for?
The Tuscan Water District has players in it that have senior water rights. Western Canal, which did do a groundwater substitution water transfer back in the 90s, which dewatered many domestic wells in the Cherokee Strip. They're willing to sell their river water and pump groundwater instead. The only recharge plan that has been laid out by Butte County, I call the Western Canal Extension. They're calling it, obscuring it, saying it's the Feather River Extension. It's the only recharge project that actually has a map that shows here's the Western Canal, main canal, and then they want to build new canals into areas that are currently served just by groundwater. It's part of their bottom line. It's their responsibility to be fiscally responsible with their resources. That's the way the water districts look at it. I respect that, but I challenge it.
Can only senior water rights be sold into the Tuscan Water District?
Well, one of the places they're looking is Butte County's Table A allocation. When they built the Oroville Reservoir, they allotted Butte County about, I think, 29,000 acre feet a year, and they allowed Butte County to store it behind the dam. And for years, they didn't charge Butte County for it. But during those years, from the 60s until the 90s, Butte County recognized that all that land that got flooded, that got taken off the tax base, they weren't collecting taxes on it. It didn't turn into a recreational paradise that they promised was going to be like, this is going to be the recreational paradise of Northern California. They didn't build up enough of the facilities, and they required Butte County to do all the emergency response. Butte County supervisors and their attorney found this is costing Butte County millions of dollars a year to host this thing. It's not, it's not bringing economic benefits to us. So Butte County resisted the FERC relicensing program, and DWR started charging Butte County to store the water. So then Butte County had to start selling the water. Now they sell the water down the river to Palmdale and to other water districts down south. There's a chance Butte County could, but the table A is a little bit more than what the city of Chico uses. And the amount of water that's getting pulled out of the aquifer it's not just 30,000 acre feet, it's hundreds of thousands of acre feet. It's not going to be a viable solution. Conservation is the solution. And then the other issue is the deep aquifer. The deep aquifer is this pressurized aquifer that's confined. If you lay water on the surface, if you flood an orchard, it's not going to seep down through these confining layers into the deep aquifer. And the deep aquifer is the one where all the new wells are in because it's the most reliable water. Now that the water table is slipping away, any new well that's getting put in by professionals goes down through the confining layers. And to get water recharged into that, it's not going to happen. The deep aquifer is recharged in the mountains and the foothills. It's not recharged on the valley floor. That recharges the water table, which is good, but it's temporary. You put it in the water table, and the water table slopes over toward creeks. It ends up in the creeks anyway, if you try to put too much water into it. If you go down Highway 70 and there's a levee there where what is the name of that big water body? The Afterbay, I think they call it. And along Highway 70, you'll see these pump stations about every 100 feet. These are DWR pump stations because the water was leaking out of that thing, and it was making the landowner who lived down below it, his land was all waterlogged. So they're pumping groundwater back up into the Afterbay. Maybe that would be a viable recharge if they just let that water go and they retired that land. I don't know. I mean, that's like a ready-made possible recharge basin, but it's probably not going to penetrate through the confining layers. It's going to end up in the water table, which is useful, but it's temporary. Taylor's got a question.
Thank you so much.
So, Jim, your experience with the GSA, and you bring all of the scientific information that you can to them, and it's ignored. That is actually more the rule and not the exception when it comes to engagement in GSAs. So, given that experience, why would anybody want to still engage with the GSA? Do you think that I guess, can you provide any input on what might give someone hope, or what could keep people still working in this despite the negative experience you've had?
Well, I'm an idealist, so I'll stay engaged, even though once Aqualliance filed a legal challenge, they kicked me off of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, which I still can attend the meetings. I can still provide input. And it wasn't like my official membership in it had any impact anyway. So I will continue to bring information to the table. We'll continue to flex our legal muscle using our professional consultants. We've got hydrologists. We've got the university helps us with some of their data, and the world is a challenging place to be, no matter what area of activism you want to be in. It's the right thing to do. So I encourage people to be engaged. I encourage people to speak truth to it. I encourage people to support Aqualliance. I'm curious I'm going to take part in a field trip tomorrow where we're going to visit some groundwater dependent ecosystems that are not being protected. So educating the public is a big deal. Okay, if people know where it's called 5 Mile Road. If you go up Wildwood Avenue or Upper Park Road, and there's parking area B that goes up to that cross. On the other side of the street from there is an asphalt road that goes to the parking lot on the top side of 5 Mile. We're going to meet down there at 1 o'clock, and we're going to look at that beautiful valley and blue oak grove that is between Wildwood Avenue and the creek. There's although the leaves aren't fully foliated now, there's Wes Dempsey showed me plants in there that were hybrids of blue oaks and valley oaks. So that's very interesting. There's always animals in there. There's always birds in there.
O'clock at the backside of 5 Mile. If you want to see a groundwater dependent ecosystem on the ground, that's the place to do it tomorrow on Tuesday. Well, thank you so much, Jim and Taylor, for speaking and sharing so much with us. Be sure to come back next month, third Monday of April. We will be having Joe Silvera talk about floodplain restoration. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. See you next time.
It's broken, it doesn't work anymore. Sometime it made me question, was it working before? It's broken. It's clear to the eye we gotta make big changes if we're gonna survive. We gotta do more less.